We shall commence this module by discussing about economic development. The study of human resources and their welfare is the central point of all economic activities, as they are both means and the ends. All other resources would remain idle without their effort. Therefore, their size and quality is of utmost importance in economic development of a country. The history of modern economic growth shows that the growth of population was one of the important factors in the rapid growth rates of the presently developed countries like England, France, and Germany, as it contributed to both the supply of and demand for more production. As Simon Kuznets states, that modern technology, which developed during the epoch of modern economic growth, also had an effect on accelerating the size and the rate of growth of population with the advent of new industries under industrial revolution. The rising population provided labor force for these industries. Since population requires more goods and services for their use, it provided ready market for the goods produced by the new industries. Although in underdeveloped countries of the 20th century, where population is already large in relation to their resources, a rapid growth of it may not be conducive to economic development in the same way as had happened in the presently advanced nations. Yet, the perception regarding its retarding effect is changing. The rising number has a competitive advantage in the form of cheap labor force, which can contribute to economic development at a lower cost. As the trends in population growth have reversed, it is estimated that while US, China, Japan, and Russia will be short of labor in the near future, India will have the surplus in the working age group and will thus have a competitive advantage in labor cost. The availability of large number of people in the working age group, more popularly known as demographic dividend, will ensure that there is a steady supply of labor to work in economic activities. But this dividend can give results only if more investment is done on education, health, and skill development. It also requires that the technology used must ensure the increased opportunities of employment. Otherwise, as Economic Survey puts it, however, if we fail to create skills, we will be facing a demographic nightmare. The developing economies of today have the advantage that they can learn from the experience of the presently advanced countries in reducing this period of high rate of growth of population, and can use this opportunity of surplus labor in achieving a high economic status. These human resources should be so utilized that not only an optimum use is made of them, but they are used in improving the quality of life. This will automatically help in bringing about population stabilization. Since population and its growth have both a positive and a negative impact on economic development, it is necessary to study the relationship between economic development and population growth. This has remained the focus of discussion and analysis from as early as 18th century. The earliest insight was provided by T.R. Malthus in 1798 when he expressed the problems and sufferings faced by the mankind of rising population. By examining the relationship between food supply and population, he concluded that A. While population increases in a geometric progression of 1, 2, 4, 8 and 16 and so on, making the number double every 25 years due to their biological needs, it results in their continuous multiplication. B. Food supply increases in an arithmetic progression like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and so on, and this slow growth is due to the limits put by natural resources over which man has little control. C. The race between population and food supply is lost by food supply, which will result in famines, hunger, starvation, and disease as well as deaths. D. The nature would bring about an equilibrium between the two by natural calamities like earthquakes, floods, droughts, etc., unless man himself puts positive checks to control the growing number through family planning and celibacy, etc. After studying this module, you shall be able to understand the relationship between population and development. You will also know about the stages of population growth along with economic growth, and you will understand the population growth and its relationship with environment. Let's now understand another theory describing the relationship between population and other resources. The other theory put up by Cannon and others who also try to establish a relationship between population and other resources with the levels of national and per capita income. The theory states that every increase in population is not bad so long as rising population helps in better and fuller utilization of available resources and is helpful in raising national and per capita income. It cannot be considered bad. The optimum population is that level which generates maximum income per capita. This theory is based on the relationship between population size, the availability of resources, and the level of income. As increased human resources supply additional labor which can exploit more natural resources, this would increase the flow of goods and services and thus the income levels. It is only after reaching the highest level when income per capita starts decreasing with the increase in population that the problem of excess population has to be considered. Thus, there will be an optimum level of population according to this theory, which would be required to use all naturals and man-made capital resources. The level of population which is below this and is not able to exploit all the available resources is called underpopulation. The number of people which go beyond the optimum level fail to increase income per capita and put a burden on the existing optimally utilized resources. This situation is that of overpopulation. Thus, the degree of disequilibrium is measured as M, which is equal to A minus O divided by O, where M is the degree of maladjustment both under and over population, A is the actual population, and O is the optimum level of population. The position of optimum population can be shown with the help of the following diagram, where we take population on the x-axis and per capita on the y-axis. The middle level gives you the optimum situation where per capita income is the highest. The other two parts give the maladjustment. Since optimum population is that size which can facilitate maximum per capita income in the economy, given the resources and technology, in the diagram OM is that population size which is optimum as it is providing maximum income per capita, which is the highest under the given situation. Any change in the availability of resources or technology or both will shift the optimum level of population. Since the relationship between population growth and economic development is a two-way relationship, we can study the effects of economic development on population and that of rising population on economic development. The theory of demographic transition shows this relationship between economic development and population growth. According to E.G. Dolan, demographic transition refers to a population cycle that begins with a fall in the death rate, continues with a phase of rapid population growth, and concludes with a decisive fall in birth rate. Accordingly, there are three stages of population growth along with the economic growth of an economy. The first stage. In this stage, when the economies are primitive agrarian economies, both birth rates and death rates are high. Birth rate is high due to various economic, social, and religious factors. Poverty goes in favor of larger families as children contribute at an early age and are source of security in the old age. Illiteracy and ignorance make them indifferent to restrict the family size. Even religion and superstitions also help in high birth rate. A high infant mortality rate is also responsible for a high birth rate. On the other hand, lack of medical facilities, poor diet, many diseases, and absence of education is making their outlook unscientific, and a bad sanitation, etc., keep the death rate also very high. Thus, a high birth rate is matched by an equally high death rate, keeping population stable over a long period. Second stage. The second stage of demographic transition is a stage of rapid growth of population as the death rate starts declining sharply while birth rate still remains high. Development in agriculture, industry, and other services, etc., generates higher income. The standards of living increases and medical and health facilities improve. Special efforts are made to check the contagious diseases. Dietary conditions and sanitary conditions improve, and all these developments bring down the death rate. But birth rate remains high, as the reduction in birth rate can come only when people are educated and conscious to keep the family size small. Thus, in the second stage, birth rate remains high while the death rate begins to decline. This accelerates the growth rate of population as the high growth potential of the first stage is realized in the high actual growth in the second stage. This is also known as the period of population explosion. Third stage. In the third stage of demographic transition, the birth rate declines significantly. With the process of industrialization, there is growth of towns and population shifts to urban areas. The spread of education and urbanization makes public conscious of high standards of living, which helps them in recognizing the merits of smaller families. With development, more facilities are available, due to which there is further decline in death rate. Thus, low birth rate and low death rate lead to a stage of stationary population, and the quality of life is given a priority over the size of the family. This leads us to a situation of stationary population and low birth rates and low death rates. The different stages of demographic transition can be explained with the help of the following diagram, where we take time on the x-axis and the birth rate and the death rate on the y-axis. The diagram shows that in stage 1, both birth rate and death rate are high, and there is a narrow gap between the two, which keeps the net growth of population at a low level. In stage 2, there is a sharp decline in the death rate, while the birth rate curve is at a higher level, creating a large gap between the two, creating a situation of population explosion. In stage 3, birth rate declines, resulting in a slow rate of growth in population, which ultimately settles at the lowest growth rate, as both birth rate and death rate stabilize at the lowest level. However, an increase in population beyond an optimum level can become a major constraint in the process of economic growth. Growth process and its rates in an economy are mainly the function of rates of savings and investment. A high rate of growth of population leads to more expenditure on consumption. However, if a large part of population falls in the age group, which is known as the dependent age group, either in the age group of children or old age people, their contribution to the earning levels is zero, while they do consume goods and services. This would reduce the rate of savings in an economy, which would in turn reduce the rate of investment, capital formation, and thus the growth rate. Besides, it will also cause a change in the pattern and composition of investment, which would again require more investable funds. Since economic development requires an increase in productivity, which is related to the availability of more capital, rising population puts obstruction in the path of development. It's not only that the rising population restricts the rates of savings and capital formation, but has its harmful effects on other aspects. For example, a high rate of growth of population results in a widespread unemployment, b, increases pressure on land, particularly in agro-based economies, C. Leads to low level of per capita income and thus the low standard of living. D. It generates an increased burden of unproductive population. E. It has an adverse impact on economic and social infrastructure of the economy. F. It also leads to environmental degradation both in terms of overexploitation of natural resources and increase in environmental pollution. Now, let's now understand the population growth and its relation to environment. The ever-growing population, particularly in the less developed nations, is not only putting pressure on the availability of food and existing infrastructure like health, education, housing, water, electricity, etc., but is severely affecting the ecosystem. The relationship between population and environment is a complex one. The impacts of human societies on the environment are a function of three major interconnected elements: A. Population size, B. Its consumption or affluence, and technology. Society's environmental impacts take two major forms. First, the resources are consumed in the form of land, water, soil, food, and services from ecosystem. And second, we emit wastes from our consumption activities in the form of air and water pollution, toxic materials, and greenhouse gases. Some wastes threaten human health, while others abrupt natural ecosystem functions. The ecosystem has a limited ability to tolerate the extraction of its productive capacity and withstand pollution without getting damaged. This would require that the increasing number of people should not take from nature more than it is able to regenerate and does not pollute nature beyond its ability to assimilate. It is clear that as people get hungrier, their behavior relative to the environment is not going to become more sensible from the point of view of the long-term carrying capacity of our planet. Instead, it is going to become more reckless. The growing numbers and their mindless and ruthless exploitation of natural resources is continuously degrading the physical environment, which includes the whole complex of climate, soil, water, and biotic factors. To feed the growing numbers, there is a need for more farming of land. For getting cultivable land, there is an indiscriminate felling of trees and conservation of forest into cultivation. The progressive depletion of forests leads to an ecological collapse, increasing floods, soil erosion, and siltation of dams and changes in the microclimate are some of the dangerous consequences of deforestation. Frequent floods and untimely rains cause heavy damage to life and property. As a result of more area under cultivation, the size of grazing land is reducing. This indiscriminate grazing leads to desert-like conditions in many areas. Depletion of vegetable cover and overgrazing is hardening the soil and preventing forest regeneration. Not only land, even the biodiversity of the economies is being affected by this. Within each ecosystem, there are various species. Conserving all these species is important. Any adverse effect on environment is bound to affect the biodiversity, which is the basis of all economic systems on earth. The growing population needs space to build houses, factories, roads and highways, which may further put pressure on land. This may lead to use of substandard land for agriculture and to loss of wildlife and natural ecological reservoirs, which might not be compensated by the game. Some other kinds of assaults that human beings are making on the life support system of our planet are generally not recognized as parts of the environmental problems. For instance, although air pollution and water pollution are considered environmental problem as these are affecting health and life expectancy, but the more serious impact of these is their effect on the climatic system of the planet, which has more lethal effects. The climate of Earth is determined by the incoming energy from the sun and outgoing every radiation from the Earth. Some gases in the atmosphere affect the incoming and outgoing process and warm Earth's surface, which is called the greenhouse effect. This effect has resulted in global warming and can be the cause of severe climate changes. Similarly, the problem of ozone depletion, which is a result of concentration of chlorine, results in an increase in solar ultraviolet radiation, which can cause skin cancers. Besides, the high yield agriculture is dependent on the ability of plant genetics to breed and select new variety of crops which can tolerate the new strains, pests and meet changed climate conditions. So, if the genetic diversity of our crops is lost, we shall not be able to select out new ways as climate conditions change. Another problem which has emerged from the high rate of growth of population is the treatment of solid waste generated during the process of development. Open dumping and uncontrolled land filling is going on in most of the developing nations, which are resulting in rivers becoming contaminated with toxic chemicals and heavy metals. This has reduced the capacity of rivers to support aquatic life, and this is the most serious problem for those who do not have access to clean drinking water in these developing economies. Thus, one can see and feel the direct effects of growing human population in reducing the carrying capacity of the planet just when it is most essential to increase it. If people do not change their behavior, then like many other species that have overshot the carrying capacity of their environment, mankind will also pay the price. As human population growth outstrips the possibilities of increasing food production, the destruction of both habitat and environment is expected to extend to devastating proportions. Besides, population growth also affects adversely the mining, which is uncontrolled population growth requires more mineral resources, while large mining enterprises change the agricultural land into township, roads, railways and dockyards, etc. Surface mining removes vegetation and topsoil. Besides, additional land is required to dispose of mining waste. The dust raised by mining activity pollutes the air and finally settles on land to make it unproductive. It also affects the water resources adversely and leads to more deforestation. Thus, mining activities degrade the quality of life. Similarly, the water resources are also affected. Rapid growth of population in the absence of a proper water conservation policy can not only lead to water pollution, which can harm the whole ecosystem, but can also lead to underground water depletion. It also leads to destruction of water bodies, which can be a good source of water conservation. Discharge of industrial wastes into rivers is not only a health hazard for human beings, but has also reduced the capacity of rivers to support aquatic life. Man is thus already changing the face of the earth and weather patterns in the direction which could have widespread ill effects. As more and more areas are paved with concrete and wider cultivable land is lost through degradation and soil erosion, the effects on environment are bound to be catastrophic. The best hopes for the world would be in reversing overdevelopment as well as by deploying advanced and clean technologies by the developing economies in their early stages of industrialization. The economies tend to become higher polluting during early stages of economic developments because they adapt inexpensive technologies that are relatively inefficient and more polluting. The more developed nations on their part have got to end the insane growth of consumption. The underdeveloped countries would have to be persuaded to follow a different path of development and to reduce birth rates as early as possible. No doubts that environment measures in general are very costly and produce results only in the distant future, but a balance has to be created between short period and long period if the economies have to sustain the growth rate. The growth process must strike a balance between the needs of the present generation with the requirements of the future generation. So what you have studied we can summarize by taking two parts. The first part has given you the summary of the various theories proposed by different people at different times, right from Malthus in 18th century to demographic transition theory in the 20th century. The second part of the module has given you the effects of population growth on not only on the agriculture part or on the availability of goods and services to feed the human beings, but their adverse effects on soil, water, as well as the ecosystem of the economy.